So now we've given everyone enough time, I think, to join. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see such a large international crowd joining our webinar today. So welcome, everyone. I see that there's still a few people joining, but I think it's going to be fine if we start now. To introduce myself, I'm Anne-Marie Weiss, Development Director of BMI, and together with our esteemed lecturer, Professor Angelo DeNisi from Tulane University in the US, I will be guiding you through the next hour. Following a short intro, Angelo will be giving a presentation on new realities in the changing world of expatriates. And at the end of the webinar, obviously, we will be holding a Q&A session. Please feel free to send us your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A tool, which you can find at the bottom of the page. Alternatively, obviously, you can also raise your hand using the hand icon at the bottom of the page. Once your name has been called out, you can then unmute yourself and ask your questions. Please do not unmute yourself otherwise. So before we launch into Angelo's presentation, let me do some introductions. It is a real pleasure for me to introduce you all to Angelo, one of the professors of the Alliance Global MBA, which is delivered in 6 different locations. He has been a professor for over 40 years and has been Dean of Tulane University for 6 years. He has been honored with Lifetime Achievement Awards from the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology and from the Academy of Management. He served as president for both these organizations. Angelo's interests include performance appraisals, expatriate management, and work experiences of persons with disabilities. BMI's visiting faculty model means that our professors are 100% international, coming from the world's best business schools located in North and South America, Europe, and Asia. We currently have professors from over 17 nationalities, and all of whom have a practical managerial focus. Our program has been ranked as the world's number 27 best joint executive MBA in 2019, collaborating with 13 leading business schools worldwide. The program comprises 10 modules with flexible tracks lasting 12 and 18 months in Brussels and Vilnius, respectively. Now, Tulane University, based in New Orleans, USA, is one of our international partner universities. In total, BMI has 10 mobility venues globally, offering our EMBA participants and alumni to take elective courses on various continents, therewith also contributing to the lifelong learning of our community. Naturally, this is an additional value besides the modules of our 2 EMBA programs taking place in Vilnius, so Lithuania, and in Brussels, Belgium. As I know many of you are interested in joining our EMBA programs, so please note that the admissions are now open. And now, without further ado, over to you, Angelo. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Again, my name is Angelo DeNisi. So today I'm going to talk about expatriates, but trying to, let me move to this, new reality, some things that are changing about the world of expatriates is really the focus of today's talk. I'm going to start with the traditional model of expatriate management, talk about some ways the world has changed, different types of expatriates, focusing on self-imposed expatriates. So then moving to why people choose to move around, description of different reasons and types, challenges facing self-initiated expatriates, then move to larger issues about expatriates in general. Eventually, we're going to hone in on dealing with local employees or host country nationals. This is obviously not an issue for self-imposed expatriates, although there may be some implications which we'll get to. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let me start with this traditional model. Traditionally, when we think about expatriates are employees, often managers, typically male, who were sent by their organizations to work in another country, sent by their organizations. Usually these are people who work for a multinational. They were sent from headquarters to a subsidiary location, typically for an extended period of time, maybe less so these days. But because the local subsidiary didn't have the expertise to complete a project, they didn't have the people with the skills that were needed. It was also to communicate policies, practices as things changed this is the way the headquarters would communicate with the subsidiaries. The model was very colonial. It really was. It was always the more developed countries sending help to the less developed countries, sending help. This was, again, this is the way it was traditionally. And again, these are about people being sent, not so much about people choosing to move, although even back in the day, there was some of that. As we'll get to in a few minutes, a lot more of it now. So things have changed. One thing is that, first of all, there are a lot of expatriates who are expatriates by choice. They are not sent, they choose to move somewhere else. They face some different kinds of challenges and issues, which is what we'll talk about. But even with the more traditional model, where multinationals are sending people, there's a number of different reasons why they send them. It's not just to help the subsidiary. Oftentimes, it's so the manager could learn something from the subsidiary. If you're going to eventually be a top manager in a multinational, you need to spend time in the subsidiary operations. So as opposed to just the expatriates being the senders of knowledge and information, actually, there's recognition these days that expatriates often have to receive knowledge and information from the subsidiary. Also, the other thing that's changed is the local employees themselves. Again, this traditional model, the folks we went to help weren't very educated. They were backward somehow. That's just not true anymore. Countries such as Singapore, China, India have very well developed and educated workforces. They're educated. They can do these things. So encountering this colonial model is outdated, but sometimes actually offensive to the locals. But people have begun studying, scholars have begun studying different models of expatriation. It's the idea that how you become an expatriate is going to influence the kinds of issues and challenges that you face. So the research has looked at, for example, Expatriates. These are people sent from the subsidiary to work at the headquarters. Third country nationals. These people are sent by the headquarters from one country to go to a different country altogether. But also then we have these self-expatriates, self-initiated expatriates, people who are not sent by anyone, but choose to live in a different country for various reasons. So these all face different kinds of challenges, but I'm going to focus for a while on the self-initiated expatriates, people who choose to live somewhere else. A number of writers over time have tried to talk about, they try to classify these self-initiated expatriates. Why are they moving? Why are they living somewhere else? So they've identified groups, again, somewhat arbitrary, different scholars, different groupings, but this seems reasonable. And I'll talk about each: career expatriates, foreign recruitees, ex-students, traveling spouses, which present very specific and special problems, family expatriates, a group that's referred to as the greener pastures expatriates, and then globetrotters, and finally the romantic. Again, different issues, different challenges for each of these groups. So, career expatriate. These are people who seek jobs in different countries, usually because of perceived opportunities. Typical countries for self-imposed career expatriates, Belgium, Luxembourg, Bahrain, and Oman are the most typical, although obviously they can go anywhere. Oftentimes, these are people who at some point were assigned to go to a different country by an expatriate, but decided that they liked it there and they would find a job of their own, sometimes related to the firm that originally sent them overseas. But again, they're kind of on their own working there because they think there are better opportunities. It turns out, if we look at this group, more than 10% have PhDs. Many of them are, in fact, professors. This idea of itinerant professors traveling around the world is become quite common these days. Many of these folks speak at least some of the local language, pretty well adapted to the culture. Again, because for the most part, they've been there. They were sent there initially. So they've gotten some time to adapt. Most of them have found that this improves their income. So they're better off than they would have been. But most of these people, most of their friends are expatriates. They're not locals. They're other expatriates. Sometimes these are people who move from one country to another country before returning home. The biggest challenges they face really are the fact that they are different than the people around them. The differences are not always so great in Europe than other parts of the world where the differences are greater. Now, I'm assuming, of course, that these are people who originally come from North America or Western Europe. Obviously, that statement is much different if these people are moving to Europe from Asia, for example. But it's the issue is really how different the country they're living in is from the country of their origin. Foreign recruitees, these are people that are hired by the local firm. So we do live in a global environment now for work. So it's not so strange for a firm in Germany to hire employees from the UK, for firms in China to hire employees from the United States. Again, most typically, though, this tends to be companies in the Middle East, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, and Bahrain. So if you look at that, obviously, you'll see that a lot of times these are petroleum companies, energy companies, who will hire people from other countries to come work there. People choose these jobs because they pay well, usually pay a lot better than the jobs they can get if they stayed at home. They offer interesting opportunities. Sometimes there are people who choose a location that they go looking for a job. So people talk about these as single destination expatriates, but they start with the location, not just they find a job. Typically, these people tend to gravitate towards, again, statistics, say Israel, New Zealand, Japan, Australia, and Spain. Different than the group above, the group where the companies are hiring directly. These folks typically speak the language a bit, but find learning the language somewhat difficult and challenging. Again, obviously differences from person to person. Likely to have local friends from work, but again, some problems of living adjustment and living abroad, especially if this is the first time they've actually been living abroad. So if you take someone from I'm born and raised in New York City, you take a kid from New York City and you move him to Saudi Arabia, there will be some problems with adjusting. It's a much different world. And that's usually the issue, is cultural adaptation. So depending on where you go, if you are from Europe or Western Europe or North America, it may be more difficult in the Middle East or in Asia, perhaps. But again, depending on where you come from, how different you are. So, for example, dealing with a Muslim culture, if you are a non-Muslim, is a bigger type of adaptation, bigger challenges. Ex-students. Students who studied abroad and decided they wanted to stay. There's typically the countries they wind up in: Denmark, South Korea, Japan, the UK, and the US. These people are obviously younger. They're just recently students, more likely to be women, and have lots of expatriate friends from lots of different countries. Typically, they tend to speak several languages. So you know they're not from the United States, because very few people, unfortunately, from the United States speak several languages. Most of us can barely get through English. But the ex-students are people who usually are multilingual. Sometimes there's some different kinds of challenges to staying in the country. It has to do with local laws about who can stay and who can work, what kind of visa you have. So getting a student visa to study somewhere is one thing. To get a work visa to stay is often somewhat different and sometimes more challenging. So again, there could be some limits to opportunities, but generally they do pretty well financially, and they adapt well because, again, they've learned something about the country and they want to stay there. Traveling spouse, okay, a problem in a lot of cases. Individuals who move because of a partner's job or career. Typically, this winds up happening in places like Singapore, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and Switzerland. Again, once upon a time, we were talking about men being the expatriates. Their wives were truly trailing spouses who were housewives who stayed at home and stay at home now. But not so much anymore. Now we're talking much more about, this spouse, male or female, has a job, has a career, and they gave that up to move with the spouse. So they have trouble finding work, and they wind up being stay-at-home spouses, even if that's not what they originally wanted. That means they're a little more isolated than perhaps would be good. Probably don't speak the local language very well. Adjustment is very difficult because this is, the person who has the job goes to work every day and spends their time interacting with people from this other country. The traveling spouse, if this person is staying at home, they don't do that. Harder to make friends, harder to adjust. This, by the way, is one of the most important reasons why expatriate assignments in the past failed and people came home early. Early return was seen as a sign of failure. Not really a good sign of failure, but not a good thing. And the spouses just couldn't adjust. And I was doing fine on my job, but I came home and my partner was unhappy, and that made me unhappy. And in the long run, you wind up coming home. This is a real problem for firms that send expatriates, and obviously a problem for the traveling spouses themselves. We have family expatriates. This is, you move the whole family. Typically, the countries Greece, New Zealand, Kuwait, Canada, Israel are typical places. And these are people who believe this new country is a better place to raise their family. Now, this is especially true if they have cultural ties to that country. So my grandparents come from Italy, from the south of Italy. So it would be my going to Italy, and I want to move my family to Italy because I think somehow it's better, and I want to get back in touch with my cultural roots. So these are people, again, who travel or move for different reasons. They don't necessarily do better financially. Many of them can speak some of the language, again, especially if they move to a specific country because they had some ties. So even though in my family, my grandparents spoke Italian, but they didn't teach their children, my parents' generation, could speak Italian. But everyone made sure that my generation couldn't speak Italian, so that way they can talk without us understanding. Of course, you learn some words, although most of them are not fit for use in public. But so you could have some knowledge of the language. And different groups actually are pretty good about this, about teaching the children and grandchildren the language. So they have reasonably good contacts. Adjustment is not very difficult. This is a fairly unique group of expatriates, people who move for these reasons. Then there are the people who it has nothing to do with the culture, but it's just they think life is better somewhere else. So these are people who typically retire somewhere. Again, a typical set of countries: Ecuador, Thailand, Cyprus, Costa Rica, Panama. And it's, I'm ready to quit. I'm ready to retire and kick back. These are the places I think would be better for that than for me to stay here. They may improve themselves financially, but really, if they do, it's only because the place they've retired to is less expensive than the place they were living before. So it is less expensive to live in, Panama than New York City. So that's the reason why people are better off financially. Typically, they don't speak the local language very well. And the most important factor for these people is that the locals are friendly towards foreigners, that they're welcoming. again, I'm in the United States, in the Southeast, although New Orleans is different than the rest of the South. But lots of people who I've known, they move to retire to Mexico, and there are communities in Mexico where Mexican or Spanish is the second language. The first language is English. All the people who are living there are either Americans or Canadians who've gone to retire, because the people there are very welcoming. It's nearby. It's inexpensive. And then we get this group, these romantics. It's a place that has a special place in your heart. They've heard about the place. Maybe they know people who have been living there. It sounds such a romantic place to live. Typically, they wind up in Greece, Sweden, Argentina, and Ireland. I don't know what your feelings are about the romance, the relative romance of each of those countries, but at least statistics, that's what they say. They can speak the local language a bit because they're interested. I've always wanted to move to Ireland when at some point in my life. So maybe I'll make some effort to actually learn Gaelic. So maybe I'm okay. I'll do okay. Argentina, I'll learn some Spanish because I've always thought it was so romantic to live in Buenos Aires. So they know some. They're happy to try to learn more. Globetrotters are simply people who enjoy living abroad, and they relocate a number of times over the years. Again, it seems the countries they wind up in: Argentina, Costa Rica, Panama, Thailand, Uganda. A fair number of these people are teachers, professors, speak a little bit of the language, and they just like the idea of experiencing life in different countries. So they move around a lot. Okay, so for all of these folks, the challenge is a function of the differences in the culture between your home country and the adopted country. The larger the difference, the bigger the problem. This is not rocket science. This is easy to figure out, and it's not so easy necessarily to adjust to it, but it's easy to understand that this is the basis of the challenge. Language, also a problem. I have some very good friends who decided that they would relocate to Paris. Both of them speak French reasonably well. And the conversation he had, talking to them when they, after they had first arrived in Paris, and he said, how you getting along? We're taking more French lessons, but, they both spoke French reasonably well. But you talked about, you call the plumber, and you don't get the plumber, and you leave a message. And the plumber leaves you a message on your answering machine. This is now somebody who is not particularly well educated, doesn't speak French like in the book, and they're telling you when they can come and fix the pipes. And it says, wow, that's a challenge. So even though you can speak French well enough to order in a restaurant or go to the go to the bakery and order a loaf of bread, get around fine. But it's that kind of language, the one that workman that you need to do something around the house that you have some trouble with. Also, it's a function of how accepting the country is of foreigners. We live in a world where nationalism has become more of an issue, that there's a lot more nationalism than there was 20 or 30 years ago. And so countries are less accepting of people coming and living from other countries. Even my own country, United States, this is a country where everyone is essentially an immigrant. The only people who aren't immigrants, we force them to live on reservations somewhere. But even though the entire country is built on immigration, it's becoming tougher and tougher for people to immigrate to the United States. And this is true in much of the world, that the world is becoming less welcoming of foreigners. Again, a real challenge for someone who's a self-imposed expatriate. Also, everyone has stereotypes about people from any country. Everybody has these. We all make statements like all so-and-sos are whatever. Okay, so I'm a New Yorker, so we'll start. You know, New Yorkers talk too fast. I probably do. New Yorkers are arrogant. Yeah, maybe. New Yorkers are rude. You know, nah, they're not. They're just busy. But you get my point. We all have these stereotypes. So we go live in another country, and we have stereotypes about the people in that country. Now, some of them have some basis in fact. I mean, stereotypes. The term we usually use is there's a kernel of truth that's at the heart of many stereotypes. So you know, it's when when you are consistent with the stereotypes that people have about people from your country, that's really a problem. When you reinforce that stereotype. In the United States, there are issues about living in the North and the South. There are people in the South who believe that the end of the Civil War was essentially a truce, ceasefire, and that it still goes on. So people from the North, Yankees, moving to the South, are not always welcome. Now, again, you think, you know, this is 150 years ago. That's all right. They're still not welcome, but they're really not welcome when they reinforce the stereotypes that Southerners have about people from the North. That's when there's really a problem. And again, everybody has these stereotypes. And so the extent to which you reinforce a negative stereotype about people from your country, more likely to run into problems. You know, Americans are loud, especially when they drink. That's a stereotype, and some truth to it. But if you are an American and you are loud, it's even worse because, yeah, you know, there he is, there she is. That's the American we always heard about. That's the one we don't like. My daughter, Jessica, was in the Peace Corps, and she was living in Jordan. And she thought she was out in the middle of somewhere, a Druze village, and she's someone who likes to exercise. She likes to go out jogging. And she just couldn't understand why she was getting such grief when she would go out jogging in her jogging shorts in the morning. You know, you don't do that. And then, you know, she said, people spit at me. Well, yeah. You know, don't you know? Didn't the Peace Corps tell you don't do this? And, you know, she said, well, people should be more accepting of other cultures. I said, yeah, you should be more aware of other cultures and not do something that people find offensive. But again, we go to places where there are rules about how one dresses, and we don't follow those rules because in our country we don't have those rules. And this causes problems. We have many students at Tulane from Asia, and they like to give gifts to the professors. Well, I know it's not a bribe. First of all, the gifts are very valuable. But beyond the fact that it's not a bribe, it just makes you feel uncomfortable because that's what it kind of feels like somehow. You know, why are you giving me a gift? You know, we don't do that. Now, maybe at the end of a course or the end of your PhD, you would give a professor a gift, but not at the beginning of a relationship or a class. We in the United States feel comfortable about that. Since we're talking to many people in Belgium, the United States, there aren't a lot of strong stereotypes about Belgians. We like Belgian waffles. But most Americans think that those potatoes that we eat with hamburgers are French. And, you know, growing up, I encountered this guy I love, Jacques Brel. If any American ever heard of Jacques Brel, they believe he's French. So it's not so much that we have a strong stereotype about Belgians. We don't think a lot about Belgians. Now, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I don't know. But again, people have stereotypes about folks from another country. And the extent to which you reinforce that stereotype, you're more likely to run into problems. So the key is got to be blending in if you really want to make this work. Some expatriates, the word hunker down, they live in expat communities. They don't really interact with anyone else other than other expatriates. I spent a semester teaching in Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic. And this was through a project through the Agency for International Development. So I reported through the US Embassy, and I would spend time with some of the embassy people. They all lived in expat communities. They only associated with, from the US Embassy, mostly Americans, but maybe other embassy people from other countries. Never interacted with the local people. In fact, I actually at some point, this worried me. The only locals they would interact with were someone who came to clean their house or something. This was the only Dominicans they really spoke to. I'm thinking, wow, is our foreign policy towards the Dominican Republic, is it determined by what someone's housekeeper thinks? Hopefully not, but I don't know. This is the idea of not blending in. It's about learning the culture. It's about learning the language, but learning the culture, going to local merchants, local markets, talking to your neighbors who are not from your country or also expats, but locals. And most importantly, it's about respecting the culture and the religion of wherever you're living. So some things may not make sense to you, but that's what people do in this culture. That's what people do if this is the religion that they practice. And you want to offend someone, you violate those norms and expectations. That's the quickest way of doing that. Even though they may let you off a little bit because they understand that you're a foreigner, nonetheless, violating someone's religious beliefs is one of the best ways to offend people. What this means is doing homework, is learning about the place that you're going to live. And this is not rocket science. It also means just paying attention to what's going on around you. So I remember when I spent a lot of time teaching in Singapore, and there's a large Muslim population. I didn't know that there was an issue about eating with your left hand. Now, somebody fortunately told me as I reached for something, said, right hand. You don't use your left hand for eating. Also, it says about crossing your legs. Now, my body doesn't work this way, and I can't show you anyway on camera. But the typical American male would cross his legs by resting his ankle on the top of his knee. If you do that, it means you show the bottom of your shoe, which is about as offensive as you can be towards a Muslim. And it's just understanding those things, these simple things that are out there. When Tulane first started doing programs in China, which is some years ago, we brought gifts because that's what you do. And we brought gifts to the first group of students. So Tulane's colors are, they call sky blue and green. So we brought them Tulane baseball caps, being good Americans. It said A.B. Freeman School of Business, Tulane University, and it was green. I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but you probably are. A green hat, saying that a man wears a green hat means that his wife is cheating on him. You don't hand Chinese males green hats. That's really offensive. And by the way, they did this. They don't do this anymore. The woman who was in charge of the program was Chinese, which I thought was pretty amazing. But again, it's just being aware of these things. Now, most people appreciate the effort almost as much as the outcome. I mean, again, like most Americans, I don't speak any other language very well. But when I'm in France, I speak terrible French, but I only speak French. Usually after asking politely in French and not understanding the answer, eventually I might get an answer in English that I would understand. But I do know that, starting out in English, not the way to go. Now, there is a catch to this idea about fitting in, but I'll talk about that much later on. There is something that sometimes makes it more difficult and makes the local people less accepting of you no matter what you do. But we'll get to that later. Okay, I said now, but things have changed in other ways. I said earlier that the local employees aren't what they used to be in the old traditional days. And so multinationals do still send employees to other countries. Corporate expatriation still is quite common. But the problem is that they're treated much differently than the local employees are. The local employees, host country nationals, typically they're paid less, they have fewer benefits, they have lower status. Now, you know, the extent to which the local employees, the host country nationals, see themselves as being educated, trained, and capable, this starts to become a problem. Now, there were reasons why expatriates get paid more and treated better. I mean, you know, they needed to be compensated for their time away from home and family. There were opportunity costs associated with being away, but still, there are differences and sometimes they can be a problem. In fact, in a lot of places, we wind up having two classes of employees. It says to tell this story, I was a professor at Texas A&M for years. I was the head of the management department. And we were interviewing this woman for a job at Texas A&M, and she already had an offer from a university in Hong Kong. But she decided to go back out on the job market because she had a PhD from a school in the United States, worked with a fairly famous professor in management, applies for this job in Hong Kong. They love her. They make her an offer. The offer is, you know, X dollars. The benefits are this kind of apartment and living expenses. The teaching load is, you know, this many courses a year. Everything is great. And so she's literally signing on the dotted line. And I said, okay, well, you know, we need your information. We need to see your passport. So she gives him the passport. He said, oh, you were born in Hong Kong? Yeah. Oh, we're sorry. The offer we made you is the expatriate offer. That's the expatriate package. You are a Hong Kong citizen. Therefore, we can't offer you that package. So we will offer you a different package. Less money, more teaching, poorer housing. This is the same human being with the same human capital, but it turns out she had the wrong passport. So she decided to keep looking for a job after that instead of accepting the job, which she would have done because her family lived in Hong Kong. So maybe we need to think differently about these host country nationals. You know, part of it, if they're not treated well, you know, what kind of options do they have? You know, they could try to find another job. Well, yeah, maybe. They can quit, revert to the local market. Again, maybe, probably doesn't pay as well. Or they can withhold information. They can refuse to do things that aren't really exactly part of their job. Okay? It's like the idea of you're getting paid all the money, you figure it out. This is not my problem. And if these host country nationals don't help and cooperate, it's going to be harder for the expatriates to adjust. It's going to be harder for the expatriates to figure out how to get things done. It's passive sabotage. You know, you didn't tell me that I had to go through this extra step. You didn't ask. How can I tell you? And which we're about to get to, one of the real reasons, one of the ways of thinking about expatriation and sending managers, it's about knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing. And so it's about the expatriate transferring knowledge to the local employee and learning from. And this isn't going to happen if this person is really resentful of how they're treated. So again, as early as 1977, people talked about why we sent people abroad. Again, multinationals. Fill international positions, help develop international management skills, launch endeavors, transfer technology, enable control, transfer culture. The point is, this is mostly about knowledge transfer one way or another. It's about either, again, the expatriate transferring knowledge to the subsidiary and the local employees, or in the case of developing international management skills, it's about the expatriate learning from these people. So once we recognize that knowledge transfer is a two-way process, expatriates are bringing something and they're supposed to be getting something, it's real important that those host country nationals are willing to share the knowledge and the information they have. They need this. They need this to happen. Otherwise, they're never going to be successful. We can't just have these people feel ill-treated It's hard for the expatriates to succeed if the local employees don't feel like they're getting a good enough deal. So what does this mean? Well, again, unless it's specifically part of the job, local employees are not going to share information. They have to have some other reason for doing it. These things are referred to as citizenship behaviors, a contextual performance. I'm not required to do it, but it's good if I do. But I need a reason. So, you know, we find that the best predictor of doing these things is satisfaction, but they're not so satisfied because they don't see what they're getting out of the deal. So the host country nationals have to see they get something out of it. They have something to gain by helping and working with these expatriates, and that'll help them get ahead. And it means that we need to look at this picture, the whole picture. We need to look at repatriation of expatriates, but we also need to think about what's going on with these local employees. This is part of the process. We need to think about how we select local employees who interact with expatriates. We need to train the local employees just like we need to train the expatriates. We need to focus on policies that are going to result in the expatriates being more satisfied and committed, and therefore more likely to help. And again, we've got to make sure that these local employees see some reason to help when it's not specifically part of their job. So the world has changed. It's not just the world surely isn't just the idea of we used to send people, now people choose to go. But even when we send people, that world has changed, but surely the idea that a lot of expatriates aren't sent, but in fact choose. The problems usually all boil down to the differences in culture. The oftentimes perceived, but surely the actual differences in culture. The further the culture in your adopted country is from your home country, the more difficult it is to adjust. And when we talk about people who are being sent abroad, again, they have to deal with these host country nationals. And those host country nationals have to be willing to work with them and help them. They can't feel like second-class citizens. And because if they do, not only will we have problems in terms of the expatriates that are sent by countries, the companies, but it's going to spill over to other things. Once we live in a place, we're in a place where the local employees are treated much more poorly than the expatriates. They come to resent those expatriates and those foreigners. You know, the phrase that's still around surely is about the ugly American, and nobody wants to deal with the ugly American. Well, see, that's then the catch for the self-initiated expatriates, right? Even though they're there on their own, if they go someplace where multinationals treat the locals poorly relative to everyone else, they're going to become more resentful, less accepting. And if they're less accepting of foreigners, it's going to be difficult for everyone to adjust. So at the end, the bottom line is caring about those local employees is in everyone's best interest. It's in the multinational's best interest because it's going to help the multinational, the expatriates are successful, and also it's going to help self-imposed expatriates, people who choose to live there, more likely to get along well if the local employees are treated well by the multinationals. So, I'm done. Time for questions.
Thank you so much, Angelo. We actually received a very interesting question from HM about life in Sweden, really. Is living in Sweden for 15 years now, and it's the last country in the world that person would call romantic.
I agree with that, but...
She's saying people are very cold and impossible to make friends with. I don't have any sweet friends after 15 years. All my friends are foreigners as I belong to the English-speaking organization here. Italy, France, Spain, Greece, or Portugal, I would call romantic places. For Lithuanians, Italy is especially close to their hearts because of the religion and Latin language. My question is, do you think that to know the language and to adapt yourself to the local tradition is enough to integrate to the specific country, society, or it needs much more effort than that? What's your experience about the north of Europe in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does take more, and you know, part of it is the place. Now, I have to say, I've never been to Sweden. I have no strong feelings one way or another about Sweden. I was surprised somehow when I think of romantic, that's not the first thing to come to mind, but that maybe that's me. But I think that one of the issues about culture is just about this, let's say the warmth of the culture. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. We talk about interpersonal space, how close I feel comfortable people coming to me, strangers. And, Italians hug, Latins hug, Norwegians, Swedes don't hug. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it does mean that it may be a little more difficult to get close to people there. And again, I don't know much about Sweden, so I speak just in generalities. But in any country, it's also the idea of how accepting they are of foreigners. And they may not care for people from wherever. And I don't know why, but it's not enough for you to work at it. They have to be willing to accept you. But I know for sure, if you don't work at it, you'll never fit in anywhere.
Thank you very much, Angelo, for that answer. There's another question that has come through about how companies can make sure to get the most out of expatriates and how to create a united company culture, including those expatriates from all of the different parts, obviously the different types of expatriates that you've mentioned at the beginning of the webinar.
Yeah. So the how. If I had the answer to that, I wouldn't be doing this because I'd be rich and independently wealthy from all the money I would make advising people. But that's the key. But you're hitting on the key. That's the problem. Is that it is about the culture. And it's about the corporate culture is important, but oftentimes the corporate culture doesn't spread so well to the subsidiaries as it does to the headquarters. And it has to go everywhere. And you have to feel that you're a representative of that company and that culture when you go somewhere else. And again, I wish I had a simple answer to tell you how to do that, but that is absolutely what the key is, that this culture has to extend in every way. So we think about the entire business. It's about why you go, how we train you to go, what happens when you go somewhere else, and then again, what happens when we bring you back. It's all got to be part of it, and it all has to be supported by the culture of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Angelo. Another question that came through asking, what's your experience with the Lithuanian culture?
I'm sorry. I have none. I'm sorry. I know where it is. I know where it's located. I'm sorry. I have nothing. So I don't want to make something up. I'm ignorant again. I know where you come from. I know where the Baltic states are. I know who they are. I've had no experience. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. So, Angelo, this obviously sounds like, we have a lot of executives on this call, a lot of people who are senior managers who have managed a lot of people already, but it sounds quite daunting, doesn't it, to be able to manage such a large group of internationals. Any tips from your side of how to best approach that?
So back to this culture issue about developing this kind of culture. So people talk about that there are different international strategies. And so one is that the headquarters sets everything. And, this is how we select people. This is how we train people. And when you go from country to country, we force the people in that country, this is the way we do it in headquarters. Mm-hmm. Now, what that produces is a culture, but there's often issues when you go somewhere that the local culture just doesn't fit with that practice. So then there's just this multi-domestic that, you leave everyone to do their own thing. Now, that's good because it makes it easier to operate everywhere, but you don't get that single culture. So there needs to be some combination of the two. And, again, this is one of these things that scholars especially say, this is what we need. We need to have this transnational strategy. Yeah. How do you actually do that? How do you have, at the same time, some uniformity so we can develop a single culture and allow the flexibility that we need in each place? Now, some people these days are talking about the subsidiary operations, how they try to deal with this. They take what the headquarters said they have to do and then adapt it somehow to their own culture, so that there's still this overall corporate culture, but still it has its own flavor. And flavor may be a good word to think about as an example. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, one of the curses of the United States is that we've brought McDonald's everywhere. So I don't particularly eat McDonald's hamburgers, but I have to say, when I go to a different country that I've never been to before, at some point, I always go to McDonald's because the hamburgers taste different. And that's the idea. See, it's McDonald's, but McDonald's flavored differently. And of course, I've been to McDonald's in India, and of course, they don't sell beef burgers in India. That would be a violation of all sorts of things. So the burgers are made from something else. Now, again, maybe that's a trivial example, but it's the idea that it's McDonald's. There's some things you can depend on wherever in the world you go to, but some things are different, and some of the flavors are different, and the tastes are different, and that's the key, is managing that. And McDonald's does that. But there aren't a lot of other places that manage this.
There is another question. Are there any recommendations when hiring people for the company and they are international? Are there any things that during the hiring process should be tested in order to make sure that that person would be a good fit for the company in that certain culture?
So let me make sure I'm understanding which way we're talking about. So this is, I'm hiring people, not necessarily I'm selecting people to be expatriates, but I'm a US firm and I'm hiring people in France. That's what we're talking about.
For example, yes.
Okay. So, yeah, so in general selection, when we talk about selection, there's, there's two models, and of course the answer is a combination of the two. But the one model is we select based on knowledge and skills and abilities. If you're hiring, somebody to input data, the person who can do the most with the fewest mistakes, those are the knowledge and skills and abilities, that's who you hire. But the other model is you hire purely on fit. You only hire people that are going to fit in the culture of the company. And of course, the answer is pure either one doesn't make a lot of sense. We need both of those things. So always we want to, in any case, even if it's domestic hiring, that we always want to hire people who are going to fit in the culture. All right, otherwise it's just not going to do well. Now let me also say, at least in the United States, because of the laws we have about anti-discrimination laws, you get too much on this fit business, you could run into a problem. Because if you have a company that's primarily white male managers, you know who's going to fit in real well in that culture? Another white male. And if you keep doing that, that's against the law. Now, not only is it not a good idea from a business perspective, but it's also illegal. So, we can't get too carried away with this fit business, but it's foolish to, whether it's an international hire or a domestic hire, it's foolish to ignore this idea of fit. They have to fit in with the culture.
Okay, so a follow-up question, I guess, on this. Does it therefore mean that if we were to have just nationals in one company, where obviously it would all be the same culture, rather than internationals, would it be a better set for culture creation, and would you have better results?
Okay, so this is another one of those big questions, but a great question. Because people who talk about diversity, no matter how you define diversity, this is exactly what the issue is. If we have no diversity, then it's easier to develop a culture that everybody believes in. It's easier to manage people. It's easier to get things done. If we all think the same way, it's easier to get things done. So what's the catch? Well, IBM was a company, still has a strong corporate culture, but used to have a very, very strong corporate culture. Now, you know, most managers were men. Turns out most managers at IBM went to Catholic school and had a military background. And why? Because the culture at IBM is a top-down culture. And you know what? There are the two best examples of top-down culture is any military and the Catholic Church. So they fit in well. And IBM did great until markets really changed. And they needed a new response to challenges. And you know what? There was no one there who could come up with the new response because everyone knew the IBM way. And the IBM way worked really well for a long time, and then it didn't. And the problem is, so if you keep everyone, if you ignore diversity, culture is easier, management is easier. If we agree on everything, we see the world the same way. But no new ideas, no innovation, and, you know, pray to God that the world doesn't change, because if it does, you don't have anybody there who can deal with a different world. Everybody learned the same response, and we need a new response.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Someone was also commenting that it would be very interesting to visit your seminar. So obviously, we are going to send you the details afterwards, how you could be attending to this seminar. Obviously, as mentioned earlier, Professor Angelo DeNisi is one of our professors of the Global Alliance MBA that we are offering. So that would be one of the chances to, for example, listen to Angelo's seminars. Okay, so looking at the time, let's wrap up. Thank you very much, everyone, for having joined us today. And special thanks, of course, to you, Angelo, for this fantastic presentation. And we're delighted to have had you with us today, obviously. For all attendees, do note that more webinars and events are to come. So please all follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook to stay updated on all learning and networking opportunities. And naturally, feel free to send us your feedback and comments. We love those. Or feel free to reach out to us should you have any questions regarding the EMBA programs we offer. With this, I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day, wherever you are in the world, and hope to speak to you all again very soon. Stay healthy and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks.